I have been waiting to do this for weeks. Welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV, and this time around we're talking Endgame. Or at least casual Endgame, but more on that later. Last episode, I had just reached level 70 and had barely touched anything that could even remotely be considered in-game. 2 weeks later though, and I feel pretty much the same way, although slightly more experienced. And in this game, that's not saying a lot. So let's say you're like me and you just finished the main story quest. You may be thinking, finally, I'm done with questing. Not so fast there, killer. You've got more quests to do, and you'll need to do them as they unlock additional content like raids and extra dungeons. And why do you want to do those? Why do you do anything in any MMO endgame, you silly goose? Gear, of course! And why do you want new gear? So you can do harder dungeons and raids, you dumb idiot. Why? For better gear, you stupid f***. Repeat until next expansion. Now that's not to say all you're going to be doing in 14's endgame is dungeons, raids, and gear grinding until the end of time. There's a lot more to do. You've got crafting. I don't craft though, but hey, it exists. And if you like crafting, 14's got it. Disclaimer, crafting in 14 is actually pretty good, and if I was going to spend some time crafting in any MMO, 14 would be it. And there's housing, if you're extremely f***ing rich. I don't house though, I'm more of an inn type of guy. But hey, housing exists. And if you like housing, 14's got it. Other than that, there's probably more non-combat stuff to do in 14 that I don't care about. For the sake of completion, I did also unlock flying in a few zones, but I didn't end up finding it terribly useful, so I didn't bother with all of them. If I were raising a second job, I'd be singing a different tune. Really, in my MMOs, I like combat and healing. I can house in real life, I can craft in real life. I can do most non-combat things in real life. But I can't really go around killing random monsters and animals IRL without being labeled a psycho. Oddly, I also can't go around healing people IRL without being labeled a psycho. Apparently, you need some sort of medical degree to heal people? That hospital will drop its ban eventually. So in my MMOs, I tend to enjoy PvE content. There's also PvP content, but that's kind of an afterthought in 14, so we'll just put that aside. Luckily, 14 has a lot of PvE content to do. Aside from the stereotypical dungeons and raids, there's also Expert, Savage, and Ultimate difficulties, and then there's Heaven on High and Eureka. And probably a lot more that I don't even know about. That's kinda my thing with 14. For as long as I've played and continue to play, I feel like I know pretty much nothing about the game, and it continually proves me right. I'll see something go by in general chat, and even though it's in English, it appears to be gibberish. And instead of asking what it means, I just tended to stick with what I knew. The base level dungeons all drop tomestones, which it's really hard not to say tombstones, which can be used to buy new gear, which can later then be upgraded through drops you get from Savage content, and then there's better gear later on, and so on and so forth. This is where I tended to spend most of my time, running dungeons and raid content to gather up tomes so I could buy new gear. Sadly, after dozens of runs, I started to find dungeons tedious. They just weren't exceptionally challenging. Now this could change with expert dungeons and higher difficulties, but when I compare the dungeons to the raids in 14, I don't enjoy them nearly as much. I think it has to do with all of the trash pulls. While the first few pulls in a dungeon may act as a semi-DPS/skills check, the rest of them are pretty much a time sink. That said, I really enjoy the raid content in 14, namely because they aren't your stereotypical raids. In 14, raids seem to simply consist of a single boss battle. I mentioned that other raids were like this in the last video, but I hadn't experienced any of the Stormblood raids at that time. Now that I have, it's pretty much the same, or at least this size of raid is. There are other raids that require more players, so those may be different, but whatever. Once again, I really enjoyed the variety in all of the bosses here. Each one had a cool design and different mechanics to keep them all unique and interesting. In fact, I believe most of them are from other Final Fantasy games. So that's pretty cool for you uber Final Fantasy fans out there. Example, in this one you had to paint different things to make sure you survived or weren't hurt by the various abilities the boss would use throughout the battle. And in this one I fought a train. This Gritty Thomas the Tank Engine reboot is fucking hardcore. And then there's this one, where you have to float at certain points to avoid ground AoEs, and then sink to avoid sky AoEs. I didn't like this one because at no point did I understand what the fuck was going on. So I tried it on Savage difficulty because I'm a fucking idiot. Nope. Nope. Hey, I'm the last one left standing. And nope. Savage difficulty really is savage. Who knew? After the thrashing that this Savage raid gave me, I tended to stay away from these. From what I've read, seen, and experienced, mostly through laying dead on the ground, is that the higher difficulties depend way more on their mechanics than your gear, and screwing up is basically a one-shot. I'm not sure if I agree with this design or not. I think one-shot kills are a pretty cheap way to make things difficult, but I can't think of a better way to do it off the top of my head, so good on those who can do Savage and Ultima raids. You have my respect. You psychos. Quick rant. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that I really only experienced the casual endgame of 14. And this is what I meant by that. Most MMOs tend to have two types of endgame. The casual one for those of us who hit max level and still want something to do but don't feel like dedicating our lives to the game. And the hardcore, who want to beat every single piece of content the game has to offer, regardless of time required or difficulty. In this example, the difference between regular raids and the jump to Savage and Ultima difficulties. This is something I'll never be able to experience in its fullest. When I announced I was going to be doing these deep dives into each MMO, some assumed that meant I was going to touch every part of the game, including these harder difficulties. That simply isn't possible without committing my life to each and every game. I'm never going to see most of the Savage raids, or the Ultima raids, or the endgame of crafting, or housing. I'd likely have to play Final Fantasy XIV exclusively for months to see these things. My deep dives are really going to only cover the casual endgame, and that's at most. For those of you really wishing I would cover the more hardcore content, go back to the part where I was talking about raids and dungeons, and then add the phrase, "but it's harder." Bam, done. Okay, cool, rant over. Moving on from raids and dungeons, another nice piece of PvE content is Heaven on High. A rather new addition, it's basically Palace of the Dead, except instead of going down, you go up. I'm pausing for everyone to stop giggling. And okay, Heaven on High starts your character off at level 60, and you'll level up in the dungeon independently from your level outside of the dungeon, while also still gaining outside the dungeon experience. I don't know how to explain it. You and your group will clear floor after floor of enemies, looting chests for items and power-ups, with each new floor becoming harder and harder. Every 10 floors, there's a boss. Should you defeat him, your progress is saved, and you can continue on with the next 10 floors. Should you lose, it's back to your last save point. From what I hear, Heaven on High gets pretty difficult pretty quick, but I didn't bother playing it long enough to find out. I found Heaven on High to be just like dungeons for the most part and ended up a bit bored with it. The other piece of in-game content I tried out was Eureka. This is a polarizing one to say the least. I had some people telling me to not even bother with it, and others saying they really enjoyed it. Eureka is a special zone that has its own leveling system, kinda like Palace of the Dead or Heaven on High, so you start off at level 1. You also have this little thing here, and there's a tutorial explaining it, but I didn't understand it anyway. From here, it's kind of all about grinding mobs, except that these bitches are hard. It takes them forever to go down, and if you are even slightly out-leveled, you are likely going to die if not get one shot. It seems most people just tend to group together and train fate after fate. Just look at how many people are here. And then a boss spawns and... I have no idea what's going on here, but it sure looks pretty. I think I'm gonna have a seizure. I found a lot of people comparing the gameplay of Eureka to the gameplay of EverQuest. Kinda. If by that you mean sitting around for a long time doing basically nothing until an enemy spawns, killing it very slowly, and then waiting around for the next spawn, well then, okay, it's exactly like EverQuest. Overall though, this seemed a bit impersonal to me. I didn't feel like I was contributing, I was just there. And I don't think being higher level would help that. I would have liked to have gotten a small group together and killed of-level mobs to see what this is supposed to be like, but everyone just wanted to grind fates, so, And this was about all I did. Dungeons, more dungeons, and raids. Raids were what I found the most fun, and I could easily see myself getting into the increased difficulties if I was planning on making this my main MMO. However, after a full month with Final Fantasy XIV, I'm ready to move on. The YouTuber in me yearns for something new. And I've got something in mind. So I will see you all in a few weeks with another video. Until then, watch out for trains. Seriously, they will f*** you up. I'm on to you.